Okay, so if our goal is to get as interesting a spot illustration as possible, maybe we want to play with these additional special effects on our coloring. So far we've done flat color, duotone hard edge color, soft edge color, and full spectrum. And all of those are used in different places. Without the hard edge, you wouldn't have that crisp delineation there. Without the soft edge, you wouldn't have the soft variations, around some of the edges. Those can all be turned on and off. And then the full spectrum, without the full spectrum, we wouldn't have the slightly bluish greens kind of blending in with some of the local colors. But what we haven't played with at all is stuff on top of the sandwich. So everything has been ingredients in the middle of the bread, right? So special effects are things that go on top of the sandwich, the first of which is called the color holds. So to remind you of my link to those slides, which are very helpful, the exhaustive explanation of digital coloring, when we go past full spectrum color examples, we get into color holds. So color holds are like an olive with a toothpick stuck into the top of the sandwich, right? Or sometimes you'll take Parmesan cheese and you'll toast it onto the outside of the bread. That's really good. But anyway. I use Wonder Woman as I've used through most of this, just to remind you, because Wonder Woman has a lasso, right? And here we see a simple duotone hard-edged, cell-shaded animation version of Wonder Woman. And her lasso is outlined in black, right? But it's a golden lasso. It's not just a yellow lasso. So to make it glow and feel really reflective, what did the artist do right here on top of the black line art? Yeah, there's like a little highlight. And unlike anything else, that highlight there and that little highlight there is actually affecting the black line art. So everything else is under the black line art except for that highlight, which is over the top. That makes it look like it's kind of glowing out. So that's a really subtle example of a color hold in one very limited place. Let's look at more extreme examples. This, right? So here we have the glowing bracelets. And that color hold is extremely strong on top of the black line art and affecting everything underneath, right? And you'll see that the color hold on the glowing lasso here is more subtle. What's nice here is it's not just a highlight. The black outline of the lasso has changed to like a dark orange, right? So you can actually change your line art color as well with color holds. And if you look closely for this lighting, the black line art at the edge has changed to a brown, to be less severe than the blacks on the other side. So when you're affecting the black line art, this is a very strong example, right? When you are changing the color of the black line art or painting over it, that's called a color hold. And that's because the printer has to hold that area from the black ink so that color can come through, because black is always printed last. So this is kind of held for colors to come in. Here we see it. Really the only color holds on this finished painting, or I should call it digital coloring because it obviously is from line art. This very, very overly rendered, coloring job behind those lines. You can see that the black of the lasso has been turned to colors. There's no black in it anymore, so those are color holds. And then the hair, which was just full bleed black, has now been filled in on top of the black lines with highlights. And so that's a color hold. Here are some other examples that I think are kind of fun from the world of comics. You can have a gradation in your color hold. It was all drawn with black lines, but then the artist went in and separated out just these areas and then replace those black lines with this gradation to give it that glass feel. You can see that replacement of the lines here. Here, the lines have been swapped out and inverted. These are all versions of color hold. Here, this one's really subtle. but the color hold is in that glow effect of the sunset, affecting the line art. So this is this stage, and all I did for this lemon was I replaced the black line of the lemon with green, and then added a highlight on top that affected that, right? Kind of a spot highlight. So I think that's it for the color hold example. So let's apply it to our own work. So how can I play with the color hold? Well, for the first time, I'm going to go on top of my black bread, my line art layer, and I'm going to duplicate it, Command J, which unlocks it. And then I'm going to fill it with a color. This is a very simple way. If I think the black is too severe, I can just double click, do a layer style, and do a color overlay just on the line art. And then I can choose that color overlay just like we have been doing. And let's see, maybe I want to do it like Wonder Woman and pick like a dark orange or brown or yellow, right? And maybe that kind of works, but I lose it in some areas. So maybe I want to make it even fancier and play with a gradient like I did my full spectrum. But let's do a pretty basic gradient here. Let's just do light to dark, right? But I'm going to swap it. I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to change the angle of it. I'm going to make it not radial but linear. There we go. So now you can see kind of a highlight in the line art. This is a color hold because it's going on top of my black line art. I can play with the scale of that gradation. I'll keep it pretty subtle, but then I'll layer in the color with a different opacity, right? Or maybe even set it from normal mode to dissolve so I get that texture in there. All right. So that's one way. I like that. Maybe it's a little too extreme. So because it's a layer on top of my sandwich, I can always rasterize that layer style by right-clicking. As long as I keep my vector for my black line art, everything else is safe to play with. And then I can use dodge and burn like we did for soft edge duotone. And I can darken it where I want to darken the line art. By darkening the midtones, right? On this bottom edge. And keep it bright in the other places. If I want to brighten it more, I can dodge it. Give a little bit more spark to it. Now this is just affecting the lines, right? So this is without, this is with. So you can see how the color hold makes a difference. Now, I also like to see it on different backgrounds, right? So that's on white. That's on gray. It still reads pretty clearly. That's on black. What's really nice about the color hold is when I do no color hold on black, notice how all the lines will disappear. So the color hold actually helps it show up a little bit. I think I'm going to darken it just right in the palm a little, just so that reads really clearly. Okay, next. Another way to do the special effect. What if I want a little glint coming off of this shiny megaphone? Well, you don't always need to just duplicate your type. It's also anything that goes on top of your type. So here's a blank layer on top of my type. And I'm just going to use my lasso. And I have my tablet here. Tablets are always helpful. And I'm just going to draw a little star shape. Right. Then I'm going to fill it. I can use the paint bucket too. I'll say edit, fill with white. Now this is obviously on top of my line art as a separate layer. Now I want to, just reviewing these skills we've learned, go to my filters, go to blur and go to Gaussian blur, the only filter I need you to know, and play with soft edging that, turn it into a highlight. Then I can of course free transform it, and kind of rotate it, kind of find where does that highlight make sense. Kind of where I had it, probably. I can warp it. All of these skills come into play, even though this is your own original imagery and you're no longer using other people's pixels. And then how do I kind of sync that in and integrate it? Well, I can use opacity. And I can use blending modes. Right? So I kind of like the dissolve option and then taking the opacity down. But what if I want that kind of soft glow in the middle of it? Well, what I can do is duplicate it and then select them both and merge it. And then I'll get kind of the best of both worlds. Right? So it's no longer... It's just a normal mode here, but it's created with that dissolve. And so then I can go in with my soft edged eraser and kind of blend it a little bit. And then I can play with opacity without it getting more and more dissolved, because it's no longer that layer style. So let's take that opacity down to, yeah, something like that. Okay, so now how does that look on the different backgrounds? So that's black bread, that's on gray, that's on white. Right? Now if I like that highlight, maybe I don't want it just to be white, maybe I want to give it a color, or maybe I want to move it, right? And then all those effects will still go through. So I can put it on the corner there. That looks pretty nice. But I want to check it on all backgrounds. Yeah, I think those help everywhere. But I could always duplicate it, use it somewhere else. People tend to overdo these little star highlights. You'll see them on the Wonder Woman everywhere, but I always do them as a separate layer. And I'll play with trying to make them all distinct. You know, so rotate them differently, stretch them differently so they don't feel too repetitive. But these are some of those special effects, you know, to give life and texture to your work. And you can always erase them out. So if I use a sharp-edged eraser and a higher opacity, I can kind of clean it up a little bit, or just do this kind of thing. Now, one way to do that is to go back to your vector line art, select all the space outside, right? And then delete that from your highlights. So it's nice and sharp everywhere. Okay. So those are color holds. What's the next thing we can play with? I'm going to save my work, and maybe I'll put those all into a folder together and call that folder color holds. So that is the olive on top of the sandwich. But there's more. Sometimes the toothpick you put into the olive has a little frilly plastic crown on it, right? That frilly plastic crown just kind of dresses everything up, so you'll notice it on different plates. We call that an offset border. So notice when it's on a black background, I can see it now. I can see my line art now because of the color hold, but just barely. So what would make it really clear is if I duplicated my line art again just like I did for the color hold, but this time